The wedding guest. Hamnavo of water and granite and sky, at grey day start I say, farewell to you, I make an end now. In a morning that is not the morning, rising monotonously upon our vanity, grey out of black, a many thousand beginnings, till age makes of morning a mockery. But in a secret set-apart morning, a triune welling of dayspring and April and youth, when fire and earth have their way, one with another, a lovely spurting of seed and egg and spawn, on such a morning I rose and washed in the rock pool, and said farewell in particular to the Sigrid's fishermen, and left the village before the girls came out to the well for their water, to the stack for their peats, laughing and letting on not to look at the strong arms weaving and baiting the black fish twine, and went on past the cross at the end of the village to the summons and the ceremony. As I went north in mid-morning, going near the edge of crags that are set stark between sea and clouds, slowly walking and lingering, from shell-strewn ledges stirred the skuas, strong beautiful birds, and circled and fell about my head with threat and thunderclap of wings, so that I seemed like a man with his head in a confusion of sharp circles. And on I went with cold bidden blood, and presently wing and claw and beak faltered and fell away, and returned to the mothering niches, and on my feet went with no change of pace through the salt-bitten grass, but my body was a smithy, an assault, a wincing, a tumult of heart-strokes, and I leaned northwards dutifully into the wind, and the wind falling folded me in two huge dove wings. In the afternoon I came to a place called Yesnaby, where the line of western crags was broken into much confusion of rock and sea, and there in a sudden green valley, locked from the noise of the ocean, I blundered across a camp of tinkers, and above a flame one man was shaping a tin cup with a hammer, and a boy drained blood through the throat of a rabbit into the earth, and a young man held a hawk on his wrist and sang sometimes, and at other times whispered to the fierce tranced head, and a girl suckled a baby, and an old man and an old woman looked at me as indifferently as if I were a goat, and a child came up glistering out of the sea, and there I would have stopped to warm me a while. These tribes exist pure, birth to death, in a fire of simply pagan lust. But that a far behest lured me towards a consummation so beautiful that we but echo the ecstasy with harps and statues, as the naked tinker boy held now to the shell of his ear a colder sea mouth. Created heart of man, when were you ever clear of sorrow? At the long beach of Scale, as north I went, a huddle of grey shawls watched the sea. For, said a girl, there is one boat, the Scarf, that went out this morning and does not come back. And they made confusion of words and wailing. But an old woman stood a little apart from them, a fisherman's mother, and never said a word, but put a withered look on the withered sea. And I tried to comfort them, saying that I too was a fisherman, and with the wind northerly and a good shoal of herring off Hoy, many a boat would be reaping an Atlantic harvest, to give all the parish its wintering of food and oil. And this word was a comfort to them. One gave me a scallop shell to hang at my belt, and they fluttered and mewed about me for a while, like white mass, and only the old one kept silence, But again, as I left them, their thin eyes prized at the oyster of the horizon. Now I was come to Coilu, a cluster of alehouses in a valley at sunset, and each house was the sprawled body of barley corn, the barrel his belly, the lamp his yellow eye, and his serving men feasting with quarrel and song at his gross, undiminished Godhead. And slow went my feet past the open door of Sigurd's alehouse, where an old man sat on a lobster box with pewter and froth in his whiskers, and past Thorfinn's alehouse, where a ploughman sat at a board with 64 black and white squares, and was silently reflected in a fisherman with 64 white and black squares. And by that mirror I knew the loneliness of man. And past Swen's alehouse, where apple cheeks in the door cried out, "Welcome, traveller," and the smell of his malt came near to ravel the ordered beads of my intention. A wedding? Begin here the bridal. Cana was a feast of jars. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. Drink thy wine with a merry heart. And past the barrels at the end of the house, and out into the pasture and through the cornfield towards, oh, most faint desire now, a ghostly bride cup. Through Marwick I dragged the struggling sack of my lusts. On I went, a beast-bearing ghost. One star stood over the hill. There in a byre door a young woman lingered. She dipped cup in bucket. She held out white, dripping warmth, cow honey, buttercup ale. My fingers gathered the cup, mouth lapped milk. She pressed against the doorpost. She gave me room to pass into the cow-dung darkness. The breathing beasts, a spread of blonde straw. Glint of sea surf in the thickening light. Woven into the hill, a first strand of sackcloth. By the old woman's fire of peats I sat, who uttered a parish litany of deaths, births, espousals, and the changing price of goose eggs. A man passed through with a lantern and a mash of old bannocks in a plate, going past into the pigsty. The old woman knelt, she coughed, she mumbled prayers, she crossed herself, she eased her body, hand by elbow, by shoulder, by head, slowly onto the rack of the stone floor, and covered her bones with a hide. The man came back with a dapple of lantern and darkness about his knees. He glowered at me and went out to sleep among the horses. The old one coughed for a long time, then began to snore softly, her mouth fluttering open and close. Then came the girl from the making of cheese and butter in the cold room next the sea, and stood in the dying light of the peat fire, and garment by garment unfolded her rose and honey nakedness, faintly and secretly smiling, and lay down with the old woman, spring beside winter, and softly filled the house with buttercup breath. I stood outside in the yard, star by star, had stepped down to fill its lamp at the sunset. Their cold fires westered slowly. A dog barked in the next farm. Light and sea noise and soil of Bercy travelled towards you this guest a many a morning, a many a sin, a many a prayer, yet can he still by no means pass over. He must bide with his feet in a drift of sea pinks, for the sea has lain with his 2 arms about the island all night, and glutted every cave and fissure, and now turns slowly from the island, glutted, and begins to ebb from the island with a sound like a struck harp, and lauds, glimmers, a frail hidden monotony, and fades, and sea lapses from crag and shelf, and from sea pink to sand to washed rock advances the foot of the pilgrim, and the bride is hidden in the chamber. She has not yet come forth, all glorious in robes of spun gold, with many a handmaiden in her train, and slips from rock the sea, and 2 brothers drift west in a boat with creels, and terse brightens, and from stone and stone and stone shrinks the sea, and 3 brothers come out with yoke and ox and plough to a steep half-done furrow, and the bridegroom is in the sanctuary, hidden. There he abides, his single watch lamp, like ruby, or stigma, or rose. And sea falters from weed and limpet in sand, and 1 solitary brother stoops now with a basket among rock pools, and ocean surges at last clear of the island, and the foot of the bidden one goes cold among seaweed, a slow, perilous dance between the cloven waters, and from the steeple the first bronze mouth struck brims. Mildly they all brim then, the mass bells swung, and they quiver up and down, nuptial summonings round on round of welcome. Here is your single cell, here all time is but the lucency of a single morning. Prepare here your distillings of the rose for the kirkyard, where lie in light and peace the 100 brothers of Bercy, and a dozen doves clustered, query round the slipway and enfold him, and out at sea a raven sail, wind-laden, westward urgently leans.